I didn't discover the affair by accident, I built the tool that exposed it. Some people say code is just ones and zeros. They're wrong. Code is a mirror reflecting human nature, our patterns, our weaknesses, our predictability. As a developer, I've spent my life translating human behavior into logical systems. What I never expected was that my own creation would turn its analytical gaze on my marriage. My name is Noah Feldman. I'm 34, and until 3 months ago, I was the co-founder and lead developer of Patternix, a Berlin-based AI analytics startup that specialized in behavioral prediction algorithms. We built systems that could identify customer patterns from minimal data points, tiny digital breadcrumbs that, when properly analyzed, revealed entire behavioral ecosystems. You're building the future of business intelligence, my wife Mila would say, her eyes bright with that familiar intensity that first drew me to her at a tech conference in Munich 5 years ago. Back then, I was just another awkward coder with big dreams and bigger student loans. But Mila saw something in me, not just potential, but a kindred spirit buried beneath my reserved exterior. Mila became our first head of operations when we launched Patternix. She was everything I wasn't: socially magnetic, multilingual, fearless in networking rooms where I would rather disappear into the nearest wall. While I built the technological architecture of our company, she constructed its human connections, speaking 5 languages flawlessly and turning cold business meetings into warm opportunities. We're complementary algorithms, she once joked on our wedding night, her dark hair falling across my chest as we dreamed about our future. You build the systems, I translate them to the world. For 3 years, that balance worked perfectly. Our company grew from a 4-person operation in a renovated warehouse to a 50-employee enterprise with clients across Europe. I still coded late into the night, still lived primarily in my head, but Mila seemed to understand. She was my bridge to the world, I was her anchor to something deeper than networking smiles. Then came the Series B funding round. That's when everything changed. Noah, we need someone with international scale experience, our board insisted during a particularly tense meeting. Someone who understands the global market. That someone turned out to be Julian Rice, a 38-year-old venture capitalist with perfectly tailored suits and a resume that read like a Silicon Valley fairy tale. He'd helped scale 3 unicorns, had connections from San Francisco to Singapore, and most importantly to our investors, knew how to turn promising European startups into global players. He's exactly what we need right now, Mila said after our first meeting with him, her voice carrying an enthusiasm I couldn't quite place. Someone who can see the bigger picture. I nodded, trying to ignore the subtle feeling of displacement that Julian's arrival had triggered. After all, this was business, not personal. If Julian could help Patternix grow, then my momentary discomfort was irrelevant. But small changes began accumulating, like unexpected variables in a familiar equation. Mila started arriving at the office earlier than usual, always already deep in conversation with Julian by the time I walked in. She became strangely defensive when I offered to join her on a business trip to Oslo, insisting that someone needed to mind the actual product development. During board meetings, Julian developed a habit of delicately cutting into my technical presentations, subtly reframing our technology roadmap toward what he called market-responsive priorities. What bothered me wasn't his suggestions, many were valid, but how Mila would immediately reinforce his points, creating a united front that somehow positioned me as the outsider in the company I had built. "He's just trying to help us get to the next level," she would say whenever I expressed frustration. "You need to be more open to change, Noah." Perhaps she was right. I had always been resistant to change, preferring the clean logic of code to the messy unpredictability of human dynamics. So I tried to adapt, tried to see Julian as an asset rather than a threat. I even invited him to dinner at our apartment, watching with quiet fascination as he charmed Mila with stories of startup transformations and international adventures. "You've built something remarkable here, Noah," Julian told me that night, swirling expensive wine in a glass that Mila had purchased specially for the occasion. But the truly visionary founders know when to let their creation evolve beyond their original concept. His words hung in the air between us, carrying multiple interpretations. I nodded politely, noticing how Mila's eyes lingered on him when he spoke, a subtle attention pattern I had begun to recognize but couldn't quite process. 3 weeks later, at 3 a.m. On a Tuesday, everything changed. I was debugging our newest AI pattern recognition model, a system designed to analyze customer behavior through minimal data points. The algorithm was built to detect what we called emotional frequency clusters, digital patterns that revealed underlying human connections and intentions. I was frustrated with a persistent error in the testing phase. The system kept generating false positives when analyzing test datasets, seeing connections that weren't actually there. After hours of unsuccessful debugging, I made a decision that would alter the course of my life. Let's test it on something more complex, I muttered to myself in our empty office, the blue light of my monitor reflecting off my coffee cup. Something with real human variables. I pointed the algorithm toward our internal company communications, Slack logs, calendar invites, email metadata, device geolocation data. It wasn't about spying, it was about using rich, complex data to identify and fix the system's flaws. What I didn't expect was that the first anomaly the system would flag would be a pattern of interactions between my wife and Julian. As the visualization map took shape on my screen, highlighting unusual communication clusters and behavioral patterns, I felt a strange detachment wash over me. Like watching someone else's life unfold through a digital window. Like observing an elegant, destructive algorithm executing its perfect function. The system wasn't flagging explicit messages or obvious impropriety. It was something far more subtle and far more damning. Mirrored language patterns. Strange timing of late-night interactions. Overlapping IP addresses from hotel Wi-Fi routers during supposedly separate business trips. Calendar conflicts that perfectly aligned. Location data showing extended, unscheduled meetings. And then came the file that made my hands go cold, a .zip folder labeled pitch assets_final uploaded from Mila's laptop to a private cloud storage. When analyzed by my system, it revealed not just presentation slides, but private documents from my personal drive, technical specifications and strategy documents that Julian had no business accessing. The algorithm labeled the behavior pattern with clinical precision, deceptive collaboration with high emotional correlation. I sat motionless, staring at the screen as dawn began breaking over Berlin's skyline. The irony wasn't lost on me. I had spent years building a system to detect hidden patterns in human behavior, never imagining it would one day expose the pattern of betrayal in my own marriage. As the first light of morning touched my face, I made a decision. I wouldn't react emotionally. I wouldn't confront them blindly. Instead, I would do what I did best: observe, analyze, and build a system to address the problem. I took a deep breath and began documenting everything the algorithm had found. If my wife and Julian wanted to play a game of deception, they were about to discover they had chosen the wrong opponent. After all, I didn't just understand patterns, I created them. The following week became an exercise in controlled detachment as I refined my AI tool to track the affair with clinical precision. Each morning, I arrived at the office early, adjusting parameters and expanding the algorithm's data collection capabilities while maintaining a facade of normalcy. The system now monitored not just communication patterns but also subtle emotional indicators in text exchanges, repetitive phrases, response time anomalies, and language mirroring that signaled intimate connection. When Mila walked into our apartment that evening, I noticed details my human perception had previously missed: the slight adjustment of her blouse before entering, the practiced casualness in her voice when mentioning Julian's name during dinner conversation. The algorithm had made me hyper-aware, transforming me into a living detection system scanning for behavioral inconsistencies. "You seem distracted," Mila said, studying my face across our dining table. "Is everything okay with the new system integration?" I nodded, maintaining eye contact with calculated precision. "Just working through some unexpected patterns in the data. Nothing I can't solve." Her phone buzzed, and I observed how she angled it away from my line of sight, another data point confirming what my system had already revealed. According to the timestamp analysis, Julian typically messaged her between 8:15 and 8:30 p.m., establishing their evening connection ritual. The next morning, I expanded my investigation, creating a secure partition on my private server where the AI could process historical data stretching back 3 months. The visualization materialized on my screen like a digital constellation mapping the evolution of their relationship: sparse communication initially, followed by increasing density after the Copenhagen investor dinner, culminating in the complex web of interactions that defined their current relationship. What struck me most profoundly wasn't the betrayal itself but the methodical nature of their deception. Julian had initiated a systematic approach to undermining my position within the company. Calendar analysis revealed 7 instances where he had rescheduled important investor meetings to times when I was committed to product development sessions, effectively isolating me from strategic conversations while positioning himself alongside Mila as the company's visionary leadership. Most concerning was the document analysis showing how Mila had gradually transferred proprietary algorithm specifications to shared cloud storage where Julian could access them, information that constituted the intellectual core of our company. This wasn't merely an affair, it was a coordinated effort to marginalize my influence in the very company I had built. "Working late again tonight?" Mila asked the following evening, her keys already in hand as she prepared to leave for what my system had flagged as another meeting with Julian. "The algorithm detected some unusual patterns," I replied, watching her expression carefully. "I need to determine whether they represent actual anomalies or system errors." Something flickered across her face, concern, perhaps guilt, before her professional mask returned. "Don't overwork yourself. Some patterns are just random noise." After she left, I returned to my analysis, discovering their most ambitious plan yet. Hidden within email metadata and meeting notes was evidence of their intention to present a company restructuring proposal to the board, one that would transition me to a chief technology advisor role while elevating Julian to co-CEO alongside Mila. They planned to position this as a necessary evolution for international expansion, leveraging Julian's connections while preserving my technical contributions. The calculated nature of their betrayal provided unexpected clarity. This wasn't about emotion or passion, it was about ambition and control. Understanding this transformed my approach from reactive to strategic. I would not confront them with accusations and emotional outbursts, instead, I would respond with the same methodical precision they had employed against me. That night, I finalized modifications to my algorithm, training it to generate a comprehensive analysis that would expose their collaboration without revealing my awareness. The system would document every inappropriate access to proprietary information, every misrepresented meeting, every dual-purpose business trip, presenting the evidence as an impartial security assessment rather than a husband's investigation. As I completed the final code adjustments, I realized the irony of my situation. The very tool I had created to understand customer behavior had revealed the most important behavioral pattern in my personal life, the systematic dismantling of both my marriage and my professional position by the two people I had trusted most. The algorithm had become both my witness and my defender, transforming raw data into irrefutable evidence of betrayal. Tomorrow would begin the next phase. Not confrontation, not yet, but strategic documentation and preparation. They had underestimated me, assuming my technical focus meant social blindness. They failed to understand that pattern recognition was not just my professional skill but my fundamental way of interpreting the world. And their betrayal had created the most recognizable pattern of all. After 2 weeks of methodical documentation, I had compiled enough evidence to make my move. The confrontation wouldn't happen in an emotional outburst or heated argument, it would unfold through the systematic exposure of their deception, presented with the same precision they had employed in their betrayal. I finalized my strategy the night before our quarterly board meeting, scheduling an automated data release that would activate precisely 30 minutes into Julian's presentation on strategic restructuring. Morning arrived with unusual stillness as I prepared for the day, selecting my most professional attire. The navy suit Mila had always said made me look like an actual CEO instead of a developer who accidentally stumbled into leadership. The irony wasn't lost on me as I adjusted my tie in the mirror, observing the calculated composure that had replaced my former social awkwardness. "You're up early," Mila commented, entering our bedroom while fastening an earring. "Nervous about the board meeting?" "Not nervous," I replied, maintaining casual eye contact through the mirror. "Just prepared." Something in my tone made her pause, her hands momentarily stilling against her ear. "You've been different lately. More observant." "I've always observed patterns, Mila. It's what I do." The statement hung between us, neither accusation nor confession, simply fact. The board meeting began precisely at 9, with Julian standing confidently at the head of the conference table in a perfectly tailored suit that probably cost more than my monthly salary. His presentation slides transitioned smoothly as he outlined his vision for necessary corporate evolution, with Mila nodding supportively from her position at his right hand. As Patternix moves toward international expansion, Julian announced with practiced authority, we need leadership structure that balances innovation with market expertise. I believe restructuring executive roles will position us optimally for growth. I watched the board members' expressions, noting their receptivity to his carefully crafted narrative. The algorithm had predicted this response. Humans naturally gravitate toward confidence and promise, particularly when delivered in expensive packaging. At precisely 9:30, I observed several board members' phones illuminating with notifications. Right on schedule. Before we continue, interrupted Heather Markson, our most senior board member, her expression suddenly concerned as she looked at her screen. Everyone needs to review the security report that just arrived. It appears to be from our internal monitoring system. Julian's presentation faltered as board members began examining the document, a comprehensive analysis titled Anomaly Mapping, Internal Breach Risk Assessment. The report contained no accusations, only data visualization showing repeated access to protected intellectual property, overlapping location data from supposedly separate business trips, and evidence of strategic information being transferred outside secure channels. What exactly am I looking at? Asked Thomas Reed, squinting at the color-coded relationship maps that clearly showed Julian and Mila as central nodes in a pattern the algorithm had labeled high-risk collaborative breach. It appears to be an automated security assessment from our AI monitoring system, I explained calmly, watching Julian's confident facade crumble as he scanned the document. The algorithm flags potential security risks based on behavioral patterns without human bias. Mila's complexion paled as she recognized fragments of their private communications embedded within the pattern analysis. This is clearly a malfunction, she insisted, her voice carrying an unfamiliar brittleness. AI systems produce false positives all the time. Actually, I countered, opening my laptop to display the algorithm's confidence metrics. This particular assessment carries a 98.7% accuracy rating based on multiple independent data sources. The system has been monitoring these patterns for several weeks to eliminate statistical anomalies. The board meeting deteriorated into chaos as Julian attempted to dismiss the report while simultaneously securing his personal devices. Mila alternated between professional damage control and shooting accusatory glances in my direction, finally understanding that her husband wasn't as oblivious as she had assumed. I propose we adjourn to review this security concern, Heather announced, closing her tablet with finality. Julian, I believe the executive committee will need to speak with you privately regarding these findings. As the room emptied, Mila remained seated, her posture rigid with realization. We sat in silence until the last board member departed, two people who had once built a life together now separated by an ocean of calculated deception. How long have you known? She finally asked, her voice barely audible. Long enough to understand it wasn't a momentary lapse, I replied, maintaining the composure that had become my armor. The algorithm doesn't just detect patterns, Mila. It analyzes evolution over time. Your collaboration with Julian has been developing for months, becoming more strategic with each phase. Collaboration, she repeated, a bitter smile forming. Such a clinical term for what happened. Clinical terms seem appropriate when discussing the systematic attempt to remove me from my own company, I responded, closing my laptop with deliberate care. The personal betrayal was just a component of the larger strategy. The aftermath of the board meeting unfolded with mechanical precision, each consequence triggering exactly as my algorithm had predicted. Within 24 hours, Julian had been quietly asked to withdraw his investment and involvement with our company, his reputation suddenly tarnished among the tight-knit European venture capital community. The board placed Mila on administrative leave pending a full investigation, citing potential breach of fiduciary responsibility in carefully worded corporate language that masked the personal dimensions of her betrayal. Throughout this period, I maintained a composed exterior while executing the next phase of my calculated response. Rather than participating in the corporate damage control meetings that consumed the following days, I focused on implementing what I privately called protocol clarity, a comprehensive digital footprint that would ensure neither Mila nor Julian could distort the narrative of what had transpired. We need your input on the transition plan, Thomas from the board texted me on the third day following the exposure. The company needs stability now more than ever. I declined the meeting request with polite finality, instead spending those hours meticulously organizing every piece of evidence my algorithm had gathered into an encrypted archive. This documentation wasn't merely for protection, it represented the complete truth, preserved in its unflinching detail beyond any emotional interpretation or rewriting of history that might come later. The algorithm had been my witness, and now it would serve as the permanent record of their calculated deceit. Mila attempted to contact me repeatedly during this period, her messages evolving from defensive explanations to tearful apologies as the professional consequences of her actions became increasingly apparent. Her carefully constructed professional reputation, built through years of networking and strategic relationship cultivation, was unraveling with remarkable speed. Two venture capital firms with whom she had been cultivating relationships for future funding rounds quietly blacklisted her, concerned about potential corporate espionage implications revealed in the algorithm's report. "Please talk to me, Noah," her sixth voicemail pleaded, her voice carrying the unfamiliar weight of desperation. What happened between Julian and me was complicated. The company decisions were separate. I listened to her messages with detached interest, analyzing the linguistic patterns that revealed her primary concern remained her professional standing rather than our marriage. Even in crisis, Mila remained strategic, attempting to separate the personal betrayal from the corporate one, as though they weren't intertwined aspects of the same calculated decision-making process. 1 week after the board meeting, I submitted my formal resignation letter, effective immediately. The document included comprehensive transition notes for all my active technical projects and a detailed recommendation for my replacement, a brilliant developer from our team whose loyalty had been consistently demonstrable through data patterns rather than empty words. My letter made no mention of the circumstances prompting my departure, maintaining the clinical detachment that had become my defining characteristic. Instead of participating in the customary exit interviews and farewell gatherings, I executed the final element of my response. During my last hour at Patternix, I forwarded the entire board a demonstration of a deepfake video technology one had developed months earlier, a sophisticated algorithm capable of perfectly mimicking speech patterns and physical mannerisms from minimal reference data. The implication was clear without requiring explicit statement. I could have fabricated evidence against anyone had that been my intention. The fact that the evidence against Mila and Julian withstood scrutiny only confirmed its authenticity. "Your resignation is completely unnecessary," Heather insisted when she called moments after receiving my email. "The board fully supports you. This situation with Mila and Julian doesn't reflect on your leadership." "My decision isn't about support or leadership," I responded with the tranquility that comes with absolute certainty. "Pattern recognition works in both directions, Heather. I recognize what Patternix needs moving forward, and I recognize what I need as well. Those patterns no longer align." That evening, I systematically removed all traces of Patternix from our apartment while Mila attended an emergency meeting with her attorney. Photographs from company events, awards from industry recognitions, even the custom coffee mug emblazoned with our company logo, all carefully packed away alongside the remnants of our marriage. The algorithm had taught me that clean datasets provide the most accurate analysis, and moving forward would require precisely that, clarity unclouded by emotional attachments to what had proven false. When Mila returned home late that night, she found the apartment transformed, not destroyed or dramatically altered, but methodically reorganized to reflect the fundamental shift in our reality. My presence had been precisely extracted, leaving no messy edges or emotional residue. My personal items were gone, replaced by an envelope containing divorce papers prepared with the same attention to detail that had characterized my coding work. "Did you really watch us for weeks?" her text message asked hours later, the timestamp indicating she had been staring at the empty apartment for some time before finding words. "No," I replied after careful consideration. "I watched the variables change. The people were irrelevant." 3 weeks after leaving the apartment, I agreed to meet Mila at a small coffee shop near Berlin Hauptbahnhof. Rain streaked the windows, creating distorted patterns that matched the unsettled nature of our impending conversation. I arrived 15 minutes early, selecting a corner table that offered both privacy and a clear view of the entrance, a habit of strategic positioning that had become second nature during the past month of methodical deconstruction. Mila entered precisely on time, her appearance noticeably altered from the polished executive presence she had maintained throughout our marriage. Her carefully curated wardrobe had been replaced by simpler attire, her makeup minimal, dark circles visible beneath her eyes despite evident attempts to conceal them. The algorithm might have quantified these changes as indicators of stress response, but I no longer needed technology to recognize the visible weight of consequences. "Thank you for agreeing to meet," she said, sliding into the seat across from me with none of her usual confidence. "I wasn't sure you would." "Predictable behavior serves no purpose now," I replied, pushing a cup of coffee toward her, prepared exactly as she preferred, a detail my memory retained despite its irrelevance. "Clear communication is more efficient for finalizing our situation." Her hands trembled slightly as she reached for the cup, a physical manifestation of the destabilization she was experiencing. According to my attorney, she had been interviewing for positions with 3 different companies, all of which had suddenly withdrawn their interest after conducting background checks. The digital trail created by the algorithm's report had proven remarkably persistent in professional circles. "The divorce papers are straightforward," I continued when she remained silent. "I have no interest in prolonging this process or engaging in punitive negotiations. The division of assets reflects our respective contributions to their acquisition." "Is that really all this is to you now?" Mila asked, her voice carrying an emotion that once might have affected me. "Asset division and efficient processes? We built a life together, Noah." "We built a company together," I corrected, maintaining steady eye contact. "What I believed was our life together appears to have been a different algorithm running parallel to mine, one with objectives and variables I was not privy to." Rain intensified against the windows as Mila's composure gradually fractured, revealing the raw emotional landscape beneath her professional veneer. She attempted several explanations: Julian's manipulative influence, the intoxication of potential advancement, my emotional unavailability as the company grew. Each justification emerged processed and rehearsed, suggesting she had mentally prepared this conversation multiple times. "You never really saw me," she finally said, abandoning the practiced narratives. "You were always looking through me to the next technical problem, the next system to perfect. Julian noticed things about me that you stopped seeing years ago. Perhaps that perception justified your actions," I acknowledged without defensiveness. "However, you overlooked a critical variable. I built systems specifically designed to notice patterns others miss. The irony is not lost on me that while focusing on those systems, I missed the most important pattern developing in my personal life." Mila leaned forward, her expression suddenly intense. "That's just it, Noah. You built something that sees through people. You created an algorithm that detected what even you couldn't see. Doesn't that disturb you? That a machine understood your wife's behavior before you did?" "No," I replied after careful consideration. "I built something that sees through masks. You chose which one to wear. The algorithm merely documented the discrepancy between presentation and reality, a function I programmed it to perform with precision." We sat in extended silence as rain continued its persistent rhythm against glass, 2 people processing the algorithmic collapse of shared history from fundamentally different perspectives. What struck me most profoundly wasn't anger or betrayal but a peculiar sense of clarity, as though observing a complex equation finally balanced by the removal of incompatible variables. "What happens now?" Mila eventually asked, her voice smaller than I had ever heard it. "With the company? With you?" "The company will stabilize under new leadership," I explained, my tone free from emotional investment. "My replacement possesses both technical expertise and interpersonal awareness. As for me, that variable remains undefined by design." "And us," she persisted, reaching tentatively across the table, her fingers stopping just short of mine. "There is no algorithm that supports that configuration anymore," I replied, neither cruel nor kind, simply factual. "The pattern was corrupted beyond recovery. Machine learning reveals that some broken systems cannot be repaired, only replaced with more evolved iterations." As I prepared to leave, Mila asked the question that had likely consumed her thoughts since the exposure. "Will you ever forgive me?" "Forgiveness implies continuing emotional investment," I responded, standing with finality. "I have reallocated those resources toward more sustainable applications. The most efficient resolution is simply to acknowledge that our algorithms were fundamentally incompatible, and to process that incompatibility as valuable data rather than personal failure. Walking away from the coffee shop into the rain-washed streets of Berlin, I experienced neither triumph nor sorrow, only the unprecedented lightness of a system freed from corrupted code, ready to process new information without predetermined parameters. 6 months after walking away from Patternix, I stood on the balcony of my modest apartment in Lisbon, watching fishing boats return to harbor in the golden afternoon light. The transition from Berlin's technological intensity to Portugal's measured rhythm had proven unexpectedly satisfying, a recalibration of variables I hadn't known needed adjustment. My new existence operated under parameters of my own careful design, unburdened by corporate expectations or relationship complexities. The professional reinvention had begun 3 weeks after the divorce finalization, when I established myself as an independent consultant under the deliberately generic title Ethical Systems Architect. Operating under a pseudonym that connected to nothing in my previous life, I selectively accepted projects focused on building digital infrastructure for whistleblowers and creating tools to identify power imbalances in organizational structures. The work provided both financial stability and a reclaimed sense of purpose untainted by previous associations. News of Patternix occasionally reached me through industry channels, their successful acquisition by a larger tech conglomerate, the gradual rebuilding of their reputation under new leadership. Julian had disappeared from European technology circles entirely, his carefully constructed professional facade collapsing under scrutiny when 2 additional companies discovered similar patterns of intellectual property misappropriation in his past ventures. The algorithm had identified a behavioral pattern that extended beyond his interactions with Mila, revealing a systematic approach to exploitation that had previously gone undetected. Mila herself had eventually relocated to Copenhagen, accepting a position significantly below her previous status but apparently determined to rebuild her professional identity. According to mutual connections who occasionally mentioned her without realizing our history, she had adopted a noticeably different approach to her work, more collaborative, less focused on personal advancement, perhaps finally understanding that sustainable systems require genuine integrity rather than strategic performance. The personal transformation that accompanied my geographical relocation proved more significant than anticipated. Surrounded by Lisbon's centuries-old architecture and community-oriented culture, I gradually discovered aspects of myself that had remained undeveloped during years of technological immersion. My natural introversion remained, but no longer manifested as awkward social detachment. Instead, it evolved into thoughtful observation and selective, meaningful connection with individuals whose authenticity registered as consistent across multiple interactions. Working primarily from local cafes and libraries rather than isolated office spaces, I found myself engaging with a diverse ecosystem of people operating outside conventional corporate structures, journalists investigating institutional corruption, developers creating open-source tools for community empowerment, artists translating complex social dynamics into accessible public understanding. These connections expanded my conceptualization of pattern recognition beyond algorithmic analysis to include intuitive human awareness, a dimension my previous models had acknowledged but never fully integrated. Most significantly, the experience had fundamentally recalibrated my understanding of trust. The betrayal that dismantled my previous life had not, as might have been predicted, resulted in permanent suspicion or cynicism. Instead, it generated a more nuanced framework for evaluating relationship integrity, one that balanced technological verification with human intuition in complementary rather than competing processes. Trust became neither automatic nor impossible, but rather a dynamic assessment continually updated through consistent pattern observation. One evening, as I worked from a small cafe overlooking the Atlantic, my laptop displayed a notification about Patternix implementing a modified version of my algorithm for corporate ethics compliance, essentially turning the tool that had exposed corruption toward preventing similar occurrences. The system now monitored for power imbalances and potential exploitation within organizational structures, identifying problematic patterns before they escalated to actionable misconduct. According to the industry publication, several European companies had adopted similar protocols, creating a cascading effect of accountability enhancement throughout the technology sector. Reading this unexpected development, I experienced something approaching satisfaction, not the vindictive pleasure of seeing former adversaries diminished, but recognition that systems often evolve beyond their creator's original conception. The tool designed for customer behavior analysis had transformed into an instrument for institutional integrity, demonstrating that algorithms, like people, contain potential beyond their initial parameters. That night, walking along Lisbon's waterfront beneath stars partially obscured by coastal clouds, I considered the philosophical implications of my journey. The algorithm that exposed betrayal had simultaneously revealed my own potential for evolution beyond established patterns. The precise clarity once focused exclusively on technological systems now extended to personal development and human connection, creating an integrated perspective that encompassed both digital and emotional intelligence in balanced measure. The message extracted from this transformative experience wasn't about revenge or justice, but about fundamental clarity, the recognition that sustainable systems, whether technological or personal, require authentic alignment rather than strategic performance. Sometimes the most valuable function of pattern recognition isn't identifying what exists, but illuminating the space where something new might develop if given appropriate parameters and processing capacity. As Lisbon's evening lights reflected across the harbor waters, I acknowledged the central insight gained through loss and reconstruction. The most sophisticated algorithm is not the one that perfectly predicts established patterns, but the one flexible enough to recognize when existing patterns no longer serve their intended purpose, and resilient enough to reconfigure into something entirely unexpected.